Would you eat a piece of human candy to save your life? Imagine opening a jar that's been sealed for 100 years. Inside, there's a thick, amber sludge. It smells sweet, enticing. But floating in that sugar is a human arm. And the doctor standing next to you says, "Take a bite. It'll cure your broken leg." This isn't a horror movie. This is history. And the scariest part? It wasn't just one crazy guy in a basement. It was medicine. You've probably heard about mummies in museums, behind glass. But what if I told you the vast majority of Egyptian mummies aren't in museums? They're gone. Because we ate them? Yeah, we ate them. But there is one specific legend that takes this cannibalistic craving to a whole new level. A story so disturbing, so committed, that it makes regular mummification look like a spa day. It's called the Mellified Man, the human honey mummy. To understand why anyone would do this, we have to go back, not to Egypt initially, but to 16th century China. Picture this. You're reading a medical text, a serious one, the Bensao Gangmu, written by Li Shizhen. This guy is like the grandfather of Chinese pharmacology. He's respected. He knows his stuff. He's cataloguing herbs, roots, minerals. And then, right in the middle of the book, you find a recipe. But it's not a recipe for soup, it's a recipe for a person. The text describes a process that starts while the person is still alive. And this is where it gets dark. It says there are elderly men, usually near the end of their lives, who volunteer for this. They decide to sacrifice themselves for the greater good of medicine. So how do you become a mellified man? Well, first, you stop eating food. Entirely. No rice, no vegetables, no meat. You only eat honey. You drink honey. You bathe in honey. That's it. That is your entire existence. Now think about what that does to a human body. Sugar is energy, sure, but your body needs more. You start to waste away. But the goal here isn't starvation, exactly. It's replacement. The idea is to flush out everything that makes you human, all the waste, all the toxins, and replace it with pure golden honey. The text says that after a few days, the volunteer starts to sweat honey. Their urine becomes honey. Their feces, well, eventually it's just honey. They are literally turning into a living confection. Eventually, the human body gives out. You can't survive on just sugar. The volunteer dies. But the process isn't over. It's just beginning. Once the man is dead, they don't bury him in the ground. They take his body and place it in a stone coffin. But they don't fill it with dirt. They fill it to the brim with, you guessed it, more honey. Special honey. Then they seal the lid. They mark the date. And they wait. Not for a week, not for a year. They wait for a century. 100 years. Think about the level of commitment that takes. The person who puts the body in the box knows they will never see the result. They are making medicine for their great-grandchildren. It's a time capsule of flesh and sugar. After 100 years, the seal is broken. The honey has done its work. The body hasn't rotted. It hasn't turned to dust. It has integrated. The flesh has dissolved into the honey, creating a thick medicinal sludge. And this substance was said to be a miracle cure. Broken bones? Eat the honey man. Wounds that won't heal? Eat the honey man. It was the ultimate panacea. Now, when I first read this, I thought, no way. This has to be a mistranslation, right? Or maybe just a scary story to keep kids away from the honey jar. But the more you dig into the history of medicine, the more you realize humans have a really weird obsession with eating each other to stay healthy. See, the mellified man sounds unique because of the honey aspect, but the concept, The concept of corpse medicine, that was global. And if you think this is just some ancient Eastern mystery, I have bad news for you. Europe was way worse. Let's travel from China to England, a few hundred years later. The Renaissance, you know, the era of art, enlightenment, science. Yeah, well, it was also the era of the corpse economy. If you walked into a pharmacy in Germany or England in the 1600s, you wouldn't just see herbs in jars. You'd see jars labelled Mumia. Now, Mumia is a tricky word. Originally, it referred to a specific black substance found on a mountain in Persia. It was a type of bitumen or asphalt. It oozed out of the rock and people used it to treat cuts and bruises. It worked pretty well. It sealed wounds, kept bacteria out. But then Europeans started visiting Egypt. They saw these mummies. And what did the mummies look like? They were black. They were hard. They looked like they were coated in tar or bitumen. So the Europeans got confused. They thought, oh, these dead bodies are made of that healing asphalt stuff. Let's grind them up and eat them. I wish I was joking. Basically, a linguistic mix-up turned into a culinary nightmare. The demand for mumia skyrocketed, but Persian mountain tar was rare. You know what wasn't rare? Dead Egyptians. So a trade network exploded overnight. Merchants would go to Egypt, break into tombs, steal bodies, and ship them to Europe. Imagine the scene at the docks in Cairo, crates being loaded onto ships bound for London and Venice. And inside those crates aren't spices or silks, it's people. People who lived thousands of years ago, who were carefully preserved for the afterlife, now being shipped off to be ground into powder and put in a smoothie. And it wasn't just for the poor, oh no, this was the sport of kings. King Francis I of France? He carried a pouch of mummy powder everywhere he went. He wouldn't leave home without it. If he felt a little dizzy, pinch of mummy. Headache? Pinch of mummy. King Charles II of England? He took it even further. He had his own special recipe called the King's Drops. You want to know what was in it? It wasn't just mummy, it was human skull. Specifically, the skull of a man who had died violently. Why violently? Because they believed that if you died suddenly, your vital life force was trapped in your body. If you died of old age, the energy had leaked out. But if you were executed, bam, all that energy is stuck in your bones. So they'd take the skull, crush it into a powder, mix it with alcohol, and drink it. The King of England was drinking the skulls of executed criminals to feel better. So when we look back at the Mellified Man, that story about the honey mummy in China, it starts to look less like a myth and more like a specific flavour of a global madness. But let's get back to the honey. Why honey? Actually, from a scientific perspective, honey is kind of a genius choice for mummification. It's one of the only foods that never spoils. You can eat honey found in Egyptian tombs from 3,000 years ago, and it's perfectly safe. It's antibacterial. It has low moisture content, so bacteria can't grow in it. It produces small amounts of hydrogen peroxide. It is, by nature, a preservative. There's a famous story about Alexander the Great. When he died in Babylon, far away from his home in Macedonia, they needed to transport his body back. It was going to be a long, hot trip. So what did they do? They dropped him in a vat of honey. For over a year, Alexander the Great was marinating in honey. And supposedly when he arrived, he looked like he was just sleeping. So the idea that you could preserve a body in honey is 100% fact. That works. The idea that eating that honey afterwards would cure your broken leg, that's where the magical thinking comes in. But here is where the story of the Mellified Man gets messy, and it brings us to the mystery part of our chat today. Did anyone actually do the self-sacrifice ritual? Did a man actually eat only honey until he died, just to become medicine? Li Shijian, the guy who wrote the book, he actually admits he never saw it happen. He says he heard it from someone else. It's hearsay. In his book, he writes, "I don't know if this is true, but I'm including it because people are talking about it." It's possible that the Mellified Man was a game of telephone. Maybe someone saw an Arabian preservation technique, using honey to transport a body, and the story got twisted. Oh, they put the body in honey? Must be for medicine. Oh, the medicine is sweet. Maybe the guy ate honey before he died. Stories evolve. They get grosser. They get more specific. But, and there is a big but here, we can't rule it out completely, because humans have done crazier things for religion and legacy. Look at the Sokushinbutsu in Japan. These were Buddhist monks who mummified themselves while they were alive. They didn't use honey, but the level of discipline was similar. They would go on a strict diet of pine needles, resin, and seeds to remove all body fat. They would drink poisonous tea made from the sap of the urushi tree to make their bodies toxic to maggots. They would literally dry themselves out while meditating, waiting to die so they could become eternal Buddhas. We have their bodies. We know that happened. It's documented. So is it really so hard to believe that an elderly man in China, wanting to leave a legacy of healing for his family, might try the honey diet? Now, I want to take a detour to something that genuinely disturbs me. It connects the Mellified Man to something you might have seen in a museum or an antique shop without realizing it. We talked about the Mumia trade in Europe, the eating of mummies. But what happened when they ran out of mummies? Supply and demand, right? The rich Europeans wanted to eat mummies. The Egyptian tombs were being emptied out. But the demand was still high. So the merchants started improvising. They stopped looking for ancient mummies and started making fresh ones. They would take the bodies of executed criminals or people who died in hospitals in Alexandria, or just bodies they found. They would stuff them with asphalt and herbs, dry them in the sun for a few months until they looked old and gnarly, and then sell them to Europe as ancient pharaohs. A lot of the mummy powder people were eating in the 1700s wasn't ancient wisdom. It was just some guy named Steve who died of the plague in 1720. And it gets worse. Have you ever heard of the colour mummy brown? If you go to an art gallery and look at paintings from the pre-Raphaelites, beautiful romantic paintings from the 1800s, look closely at the shadows. Look at the rich, warm brown tones in the background. That paint? It was made from crushed mummies. It was a popular pigment. Caput mortuum, mummy brown. Artists loved it because it had this weird, transparent quality that was great for shading. You could walk into an art supply store in London in the 19th century and buy a tube of paint that was literally a person. There is a famous story about the writer Rudyard Kipling. He was hanging out with an artist friend, Alma Tadema, and the artist mentions casually, "Oh yeah, the paint is made from actual mummies." Kipling didn't believe him. He thought it was just a name, like burnt sienna. So the artist brings out the tube of paint and they smell it, and it smells like death and ancient spice. Kipling was so horrified that he took the tube of paint, went outside, and gave it a Christian burial in the garden. He couldn't handle the fact that he was looking at a liquefied human being. This practice continued until, get this, the 1960s. In the 1960s, the company that made the paint, Robertson's, finally ran out. The owner literally said, "We might have a few odd limbs lying around, but we're basically out of mummies." That's barely 60 years ago. So why am I telling you about paint and fake mummies when we're supposed to be talking about the Mellified Man? Because it shows us that the line between human being and commodity is terrifyingly thin. The Mellified Man, the idea of turning a person into a jar of candy, sounds like a fairy tale monster. But we, the civilized world, turned people into powder, paint, and fuel. Let's go back to the jar, the honey coffin. If you found that jar today and you could run a DNA test on the sludge inside, what would you find? You'd find human DNA. You'd find glucose. You'd find enzymes. From a chemical standpoint, would it heal you? Well, honey is good for wounds. It creates a barrier. It keeps moisture in. If you had a cut, slathering Mellified Man on it might actually help prevent infection, but not because of the human meat, because of the honey. The human part? That's just magical thinking. That's the idea of like cures like. If my leg is broken, I need to eat a leg. If my head hurts, I need to eat a skull. It's a belief system called sympathetic magic, and it ruled medicine for thousands of years. But there's another layer to the Mellified Man mystery, a symbolic one. In many cultures, honey is associated with rebirth and immortality. It doesn't rot. It's golden, like the sun. By becoming the honey, the man is trying to cheat death. He isn't just dying, he is transmuting. He is becoming something eternal. It's the same drive that made the Egyptians build pyramids, the same drive that made the Japanese monks starve themselves. We are terrified of being forgotten. We are terrified of rotting. The Mellified Man says, I will not rot. I will become sweet. I will become useful. I will be consumed. And in that way, I will live on inside of you. It's kind of poetic in a really gross way. But let's be real. If someone offered me a spoon of 100-year-old grandpa honey today, I'm passing. I'll stick to penicillin. But here is the retention point, the thing that really keeps me up at night regarding this story. We talk about this like it's ancient history, like we've moved past it. But have we? We transplant organs. We take blood from one person and put it in another. We use stem cells. We are still using the human body as a repair kit for other human bodies. Obviously, it's different. We have consent, usually. We have science. We aren't eating it. But the core principle, that the cure for a human is another human, that hasn't changed. Now, I want to address the fake aspect one more time, because this is where the investigation takes a weird turn. Some historians think the Mellified Man was actually a cover story. Imagine you are a grave robber in the Middle East. You find a body preserved in honey, like Alexander the Great. You want to sell it. But you can't just say, hey, I dug up a grave. So you make up a legend. You say, oh no, this isn't a corpse I stole. This is a holy man who chose to turn into medicine. It's a specialized product. It washes away the sin. If you eat a stolen corpse, you're a monster. If you eat a mellified man who volunteered, you're honoring his sacrifice. The story might have been invented just to make the buyer feel better about being a cannibal. It's marketing. It's branding. Don't worry, this is ethical human flesh. It sounds ridiculous, but that's how humans work. We need a narrative to justify the horrific. So where does that leave us with the Mellified Man? Fact or fiction? The verdict from most modern historians is, it's likely a mix. 1. Fact. People were preserved in honey, Alexander, etc. 2. Fact. People ate human remains for medicine, Mumia. 3. Fact. There were extreme self-sacrifice rituals in Asia, Sokushinbutsu. You take those 3 facts, put them in a blender, and let them sit for a few hundred years of folklore, and out pops the Mellified Man. But does it matter if it was real? The fact that it was written down in a medical text, the fact that people believed it worked, tells us everything we need to know about our ancestors. They were desperate. Life was short, painful, and full of diseases they didn't understand. If a doctor told you that eating a candied arm would save your dying child, you'd probably do it. You'd ask for a second helping. We judge them now, sitting here with our antibiotics and our MRIs, but pain makes people do unthinkable things. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere in a hidden cellar in a remote province, there is still a jar, sealed with wax, marked with a date from 1924, waiting for the seal to be broken. Because if the legend is true, the process takes 100 years, 1924 to 2024. We are right in the window. If someone opens that jar tomorrow, would you want to know what's inside? Or is it better that some doors stay closed? You know, doing research for this channel, I see a lot of dead bodies, mummies, skeletons, bog bodies. Usually I feel sad for them. They were people, they had lives. But the Mellified Man makes me feel something else. It makes me wonder about the boundary of the body. At what point do you stop being you and start being medicine? Is it when the heart stops? Is it when the brain stops? Or is it when someone decides you are more useful as a raw material than as a memory? The Egyptian mummies were stripped of their wrappings and burned as fuel for steam trains. Did you know that? Mark Twain wrote about it. They used pharaohs to run locomotives because they burned hot. We used them as paint. We used them as fertilizer. We ate them. The Mellified Man is just the most extreme example of a universal truth. To the living, the dead are just things. And that is a hard pill to swallow. Or a hard spoonful of honey to swallow. I want to leave you with a thought about the mummy curse. We always think the curse is supernatural. You open the tomb, a ghost comes out, you get sick. But maybe the real curse is what we did to them. Maybe the madness that overtook Europe, the obsession with eating death, was the curse. We consumed the dead, and in return we lost a little bit of our humanity. We turned our ancestors into commodities. The Mellified Man might be a myth, but the mindset that created him was very, very real. So, next time you put honey in your tea, watch how it dissolves. Watch how it turns from a solid dollop into a golden liquid that disappears into the water. And remember that somewhere in history, a man believed that if he could just dissolve into that sweetness, he could live forever. He didn't want to die, he wanted to heal the world. And in a twisted, horrific way, maybe he did. I want to hear from you in the comments. Be honest. If you were living in the 1600s and you had a terminal illness and the best doctor in the land handed you a vial of Mumia and told you it was the only cure, would you drink it? Would your survival instinct override your disgust, or would you choose death over cannibalism? Let me know. And while you're down there, tell me if you've ever seen a painting with Mummy Brown in it. You might want to check the museums near you. You might be staring at a ghost. Thanks for hanging out in the dark side of history with me today. I'll see you in the next one.